I saved for 20 years so my daughter could attend Harvard, working double shifts as a janitor, skipping meals, selling everything I owned. Then on graduation day, I heard her tell her friends, "He can't even speak proper English. Pretend you don't know him." It's embarrassing. Her words cut deeper than any knife. But what she didn't know was that for 2 years, while mopping floors at night, I'd been secretly learning 7 languages. And in just moments, the dean would call my name, not as a janitor, not as her embarrassing father, but as Harvard's distinguished keynote speaker. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't spoken in anger, but in 7 different tongues. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel less than worthy, this story will break your heart before putting it back together. Follow our channel for more powerful true stories that remind us what it means to be human. Like and comment below to let us know where you're watching from. I still remember the weight of that worn brown suit against my skin, the pants a little too tight around the hips, the soles of my shoes coming loose with each step I took across Harvard's polished marble floors, but none of that mattered. Not the whispers, not the stares. I had spent years saving every penny, skipping lunches, selling old tools from my garage, washing neighborhood cars on Sundays, all so my Elizabeth could walk these hallowed halls. That day, all I wanted was to see my daughter shine, to stand in the shadows and watch her become everything I never could. The auditorium was filled with America's finest. Doctors' children, lawyers' children, professors' children. And then there was my Lizzie, my brilliant girl who had somehow managed to break through despite having only me, a janitor with calloused hands and a heavy accent, as her foundation. I spotted her immediately among the sea of black gowns. My chest swelled with a pride so fierce it nearly knocked me backward. She was standing with a group of students, all of them laughing, their futures stretching out before them like golden highways. When she saw me, something flickered across her face, something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even recognition. It was shame. "Who's that?" one of her friends asked, noticing her expression change. I was already walking toward her, my hand half raised in greeting, my lips forming her name. And then I heard it, clear as a bell on a winter morning, cutting through the ambient chatter of the crowded hall. "He can't even speak proper English," my daughter said, her voice carrying just far enough for me to hear every syllable. "Pretend you don't know him." God, this is so embarrassing. I didn't collapse right there only because of an old man's stubbornness. I froze, as if time had crystallized around me. They all laughed with her, these children of privilege who had never known hunger or sacrifice. Only I remained still, frozen from the inside out. In my 68 years, I had survived poverty in Kentucky coal country. I had weathered the loss of my Mary to cancer when Elizabeth was just 7. I had endured 12-hour shifts mopping floors at Boston University while raising a daughter alone. But nothing, not one single hardship, had prepared me for the way my heart would shatter hearing my own child deny me. The worst part wasn't the words themselves. It was how easily they came to her, as if she'd been practicing them, rehearsing this rejection, as if she'd been waiting for the opportunity to cut the final thread connecting her to her past, to me. I stood there, my hand slowly lowering, watching as she turned her back. The students around her snickered behind manicured hands, stealing glances at my threadbare suit, my worn shoes, the calluses on my fingers that told the story of a life spent in labor. An usher approached, eyeing me with suspicion. "Sir, can I help you find your seat?" I cleared my throat, struggling to push words past the knot that had formed there. I'm Elizabeth Morgan's father," I managed in my Kentucky drawl, each word hanging heavy with the accent she was so desperate to erase. The usher's expression softened slightly. "The ceremony will begin soon. You should take your seat." As I turned to go, something caught my eye. A program on a nearby table listing the day's events. Something about a special guest speaker. I didn't think much of it then. I was too busy trying to remember how to breathe. I found my seat in the back row, far from where my daughter stood with her new world. I sat down heavily, my bones aching with more than just age. I thought about the nights I'd spent teaching her to read, my finger tracing the words in her picture books. I remembered her tiny hand clutching mine on her first day of school, her voice trembling as she asked, "Daddy, what if they make fun of me?" "They won't, Lizzie Bear," I had promised. "You're the smartest, bravest girl in the world." How was I to know that years later it would be my own daughter making fun of me? The lights dimmed. The ceremony was about to begin. I straightened my tie, the only new thing I wore, A gift from Elizabeth 3 Christmases ago before Harvard, before she became someone I barely recognized. As the dean approached the podium, I closed my eyes and did what I'd done every day since Mary died. I spoke to her in my thoughts. Our girl is ashamed of me, Mary, of how I talk, of where we come from. What did I do wrong? I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that the silence killing me in that moment would soon give way to something else entirely. Something neither Elizabeth nor I could have possibly predicted. Something that would change both our lives forever. My Lizzie didn't always speak English like those Harvard professors. When she was little, her words tumbled out in a mix of my Kentucky drawl and her mother's gentle Tennessee lilt. She was barely 3 when Mary and I would spread uncooked rice across our worn linoleum kitchen floor, and I'd guide her tiny finger to trace letters in the grains. A is for apple, I'd say, my work-roughened hand enveloping hers, just like the ones we pick at Johnson's orchard every fall. She'd giggle, scattering rice everywhere, then look up at me with those eyes, Mary's eyes, full of wonder and trust. Again, Daddy. Show me again. After Mary died, those rice letters became our lifeline. While other widowers might have turned to the bottle, I turned to phonics workbooks and children's dictionaries. I'd sit at our kitchen table long after Lizzie went to bed, a dictionary splayed open beside me as I struggled through notes from her teachers. Words like curriculum and assessment might as well have been written in Chinese. But I persisted, determined that my own limited education wouldn't hold my daughter back. By 4th grade, Lizzie was correcting my pronunciation, but always with a gentle smile. "It's library, not library, Daddy," she'd say, slipping her small hand into mine. Then she'd add, "But I like how you say it better." When high school came, she started bringing home awards. Debate team champion, science fair winner, perfect attendance. Our refrigerator disappeared beneath certificates and ribbons. At her high school graduation, she hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. "This is because of you, Daddy," she whispered against my shoulder. "Everything I am is because of you." I believed her then. God help me. I believed every word. The first sign of the change came during her freshman year at Harvard. Her calls home grew shorter, spaced further apart. The Thanksgiving break she spent with a roommate's family in Connecticut. For Christmas, she stayed only 3 days before rushing back to study sessions with classmates. During her sophomore year, I noticed she'd started speaking differently. Not just the words she chose, but the way she pronounced them. Gone was any trace of our Kentucky roots. She'd polished her accent to a high New England shine. One weekend, I surprised her with a visit. I'd saved for months to afford the bus ticket and a night at a cheap motel. We met at a coffee shop near campus, one of those places where the menu is written in chalk and everything costs triple what it should. "I'll have a small coffee, please," I told the barista. "It's tall, Daddy," Lizzie corrected, not meeting my eyes. "They don't say small here." "Right, sorry. A tall coffee, then." As we sat by the window, I fumbled through stories about neighbors and church friends, desperate to bridge the growing gap between us. When I mentioned Mrs. Peterson's new grandbaby, Lizzie's phone buzzed. She checked it quickly, then typed a response. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Group project." I nodded, though we both knew it was a lie. When the barista called my name, mangling it in a way that would have made us laugh in the old days, I went to get my drink. On my return, I overheard Lizzie speaking to someone on her phone. "No, I can't tonight. I'm with someone from back home. Not my father, not my dad. Someone from back home." Like I was a distant acquaintance she'd reluctantly agreed to meet. Later that day, as I was leaving, I tried to hug her. She allowed it, but her body remained stiff, arms barely touching my back before she pulled away. "I go to the library now," I said, pronouncing it carefully. "Not library." She didn't smile. "It's not, I go, Dad. It's I'm going. That's basic English." I forced a laugh, trying to break the tension, but her expression remained fixed, annoyed. She didn't smile back. The final blow came during her junior year. We were at a family gathering, my brother-in-law's 60th birthday back in Kentucky. Lizzie had come only because it coincided with spring break and a canceled study abroad program. Throughout the afternoon, she stayed glued to her phone, physically present but mentally elsewhere. My niece asked her about Harvard, eyes wide with admiration. Instead of answering, Lizzie launched into a story about her roommate's family estate in Martha's Vineyard and their summer sailing trips. Later, as we sat around the dining table covered in my sister's best tablecloth, someone asked Lizzie if she got her smarts from me. Before I could even feel the pride of such a suggestion, she laughed, a sharp, cutting sound I'd never heard from her before. Dad? No. He talks like he learned English listening to AM radio. The table fell silent. A few nervous chuckles broke out, then full laughter as others joined in, assuming it was good-natured ribbing. Only my sister noticed my expression and shot Lizzie a disapproving look. I laughed too, eventually. What else could I do? But something inside me, something essential and previously unbreakable, had finally begun to crack. That night, as I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, I realized my daughter wasn't just moving forward in life. She was running away from me, from her past, from everything that made her who she was, and I had no idea how to bring her back. It was raining the day I found that pamphlet. Not the gentle spring shower that brings life to Kentucky bluegrass, but a harsh northeastern downpour that seemed determined to wash away everything in its path. I was huddled at the bus stop after my night shift, my janitor's uniform hidden beneath a threadbare raincoat I'd owned since before Lizzie was born. The wind whipped a soggy piece of paper against my ankle. Normally, I would have ignored it, just another piece of city trash. But something made me reach down, my joints protesting with each movement, to pick it up. Free language classes for adults, it read in bold letters. Below that, in smaller print, Boston Community College. All levels welcome. No one turned away. I stared at those words as the rain pelted the plastic shelter above me. My fingers trembled, and not just from the cold. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Mary died. A small spark igniting somewhere deep inside me. Not hope exactly, more like defiance. I folded the wet paper carefully and tucked it into my wallet, right behind the faded photo of Lizzie on her 10th birthday, the last one before her mother passed. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside a classroom in the basement of Boston Community College. Through the small window in the door, I could see about a dozen adults of various ages sitting in a circle. My courage faltered. Who was I kidding? A 67-year-old janitor with an 8th grade education thinking he could learn to speak proper English. I turned to leave, shame burning my cheeks. Are you here for the language class? The voice startled me. I turned to find an elderly woman with thick glasses and a white cane. Her smile was warm, her eyes milky with cataracts, but somehow still piercing. I was just leaving, I stammered, my Kentucky accent suddenly feeling like a heavy stone in my mouth. That's a shame, she said, tilting her head. We could use another voice in our circle. I'm Miriam, by the way. I teach the class. You're blind, I blurted out, immediately regretting my bluntness. She laughed, a rich sound that echoed in the empty hallway. And you have an accent. Now that we've stated the obvious, would you like to come inside? The coffee isn't great, but it's hot. Before I could protest, she had opened the door and guided me inside with a surprisingly firm hand on my elbow. The circle of students looked up as we entered. I recognized the faces of immigrants, refugees, and working-class Americans. People like me who had been made to feel that their voices didn't belong. Everyone, this is... Miriam paused, realizing she hadn't asked my name. Robert, I supplied quietly. Robert Morgan. Welcome, Robert. Please, take a seat. We were just about to begin introductions. My legs carried me to an empty chair before my brain could object. I sat down stiffly, hands clasped tightly in my lap. In this circle, Miriam began, we practice not just languages, but courage. Speaking a new language or improving one you already know is an act of bravery. So before we begin, I want each of you to share your name and why you're here. One by one they spoke. Hassan, a Syrian refugee who had been a doctor in Damascus. Gloria, a Mexican grandmother who wanted to read bedtime stories to her American-born grandchildren. Filipino, a doorman at a luxury hotel who was tired of rich people snickering when he mispronounced their names. Then it was my turn. All eyes turned to me, and my throat closed up. I couldn't form a single word. The silence stretched on, painfully. Miriam sensed my distress. It's all right, Robert. We all start somewhere. I took a deep breath. My name is Robert Morgan, I began, each word feeling like a stone being dislodged from my chest. I'm here because... I paused, unsure how to continue. I couldn't tell them about Lizzie, about her shame, about the way her words had cut me to the bone. I'm here because I want to learn, I finally said. I never finished school and I want to be better. Miriam nodded, her unseeing eyes somehow finding mine. If you know how to love, Mr. Morgan, you already speak the most difficult language in the world. The rest we can learn together. Something in her words unlocked a door within me. For the first time since Mary died, I felt seen, truly seen, by another human being. I returned the next day, and the day after that, and every Tuesday and Thursday evening for months. We became a family of sorts. Hassan with his medical terminology, Gloria with her colorful phrases, Filipino with his booming laugh that filled the room whenever he mastered a difficult pronunciation, and me, the old janitor who started bringing a notebook, filling it with words and phrases not just in English but in German, Italian, French, languages I'd once thought were as distant and unreachable as the stars. One evening, as we were practicing French conjugations, Miriam placed a book of poetry in my hands. "Read the marked page, Robert," she instructed, out loud. I stared at the unfamiliar words, panic rising in my throat. "I can't," I whispered. "Yes, you can," she insisted. "I've been listening to you for months now. Your ear is good, your memory exceptional. Trust yourself." Slowly, hesitantly, I began to read the French poem. The words felt strange on my tongue at first, but then something remarkable happened. They began to flow, to dance, to sing. When I finished, the room was silent. "That," Miriam said quietly, "was Baudelaire. And you, Robert Morgan, just read him beautifully." I looked around at the circle of faces all smiling, some with tears in their eyes. In that moment, I made a choice that would change everything, though I didn't know it then. I decided that if my daughter was ashamed of my voice, I would create a new one, not to replace the old, but to stand alongside it. Not a single person in that room knew about Harvard, about Lizzie, about the pain driving me forward. This choice was mine alone, hidden from the world, nurtured in the shadows of my shame and heartbreak. As I walked home that night, the stars seemed brighter somehow. I whispered to Mary, as I often did, "I'm learning to speak again, love. Not just with my voice, but with my soul." Time moves differently when you're remaking yourself. The days blend together, marked not by calendar dates, but by small victories. The first time I dreamed in French. The afternoon I successfully argued with a grocery clerk in Italian over an expired coupon. The evening Hassan and I conversed in German for 30 minutes straight, forgetting that we both spoke English. 2 years before Lizzie's graduation, I received an unexpected phone call from Miriam. By then, our little language group had become something of a local phenomenon. What had started as basic lessons had evolved into a multilingual poetry club that met at the public library every Sunday afternoon. "Robert," Miriam said, her voice crackling with excitement, "the Boston Public Library is launching a new project. They want to create an audio archive of poetry readings in different languages. They've asked our group to participate." My heart skipped a beat. "You mean recording?" "Yes. They'll pay us with bus passes and meal vouchers. Nothing fancy, but it's recognition of our work." She paused. "I recommended you as our lead reader for the French and Italian selections." I nearly dropped the phone. "Me? But surely Hassan is wonderful with German, yes. But you, Robert, you have something special when you read poetry. Something that transcends mere pronunciation or grammar. You breathe life into the words." I stood in my tiny kitchen, staring at the calendar where I'd marked Lizzie's next brief visit home with a red circle. She was due to arrive in 3 days for a weekend, her first trip home in nearly 8 months. "When would the recordings take place?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "This Sunday. I know it's short notice, but I'll do it," I said, making my decision before I could reconsider. I'd reschedule with Lizzie, make up some excuse about extra work shifts. She'd be disappointed, maybe even annoyed, but something told me this opportunity mattered, that somehow it was a step on a path I needed to follow. The library's recording studio was nothing more than a converted storage room with sound-dampening panels hastily attached to the walls. But to me, it felt like hallowed ground. I stood before the microphone, hands trembling slightly as I opened the leather-bound volume of Victor Hugo's poetry. "Whenever you're ready, Mr. Morgan," said the young technician behind the glass partition. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and began to read Demain, de l'Aube. Hugo's words about visiting his daughter's grave on the anniversary of her death. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, reciting a poem about a father's devotion while my own daughter drifted further away with each passing day. When I finished, I opened my eyes to find the small observation room now crowded with people, including several I didn't recognize. Among them stood a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "That was extraordinary," he said, stepping into the recording booth. "Truly remarkable." "I'm David Lawson, Dean of Humanities at Harvard." My heart nearly stopped at the word Harvard, but I managed to extend my hand. "Robert Morgan," I replied simply. "Your French is impeccable, Mr. Morgan. Where did you study?" A small, sad smile crossed my lips. "Boston Community College, Tuesday and Thursday evenings." His eyebrows shot up. "You're joking." "No, sir. I'm a janitor by trade. Languages are a recent passion." Dean Lawson insisted on hearing more. We moved to the library's cafe where I sat across from him, sipping tea from a chipped mug while he peppered me with questions. How many languages did I speak? 7, with varying degrees of fluency. How long had I been studying? Just under 2 years. What drew me to languages in the first place? I hesitated at this last question, stirring my tea unnecessarily. "I suppose I wanted to prove something to myself," I finally said. "That an old dog can indeed learn new tricks." "Well, you've certainly done that," he replied. "In fact, you've done something quite remarkable. Your ear for language is extraordinary, especially at your age." For nearly an hour we talked, about poetry, about the power of words, about the invisible threads that connect human beings across cultures and time. Not once did I mention Lizzie. Not once did I reveal that his prestigious university was the very place my daughter had begun to erase me from her life. As our conversation wound down, Dean Lawson leaned forward. "Mr. Morgan, I'm involved with a multilingual educational initiative at Harvard. We're always looking for people with your unique perspective. Would you be interested in consulting with us occasionally? It would be paid, of course." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "Consulting? At Harvard? But I'm just a man with an extraordinary gift," he interrupted firmly. "Credentials and degrees are important, yes, but they're not everything. Sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from unexpected places." I left the library that day with Dean Lawson's business card tucked carefully into my wallet, right next to the weathered photo of Lizzie and the now tattered language class flyer. 3 seemingly disconnected pieces of paper that were, in fact, weaving themselves into a tapestry I couldn't yet see. Over the next few months, I began visiting Harvard once a week, working with graduate students in the comparative literature department. I never ran into Lizzie. Her studies in political science kept her in a different part of campus, but I felt her presence everywhere. In the manicured lawns she walked across daily, in the Gothic buildings where she attended lectures, in the prestigious institution that was simultaneously my daughter's pathway to a better life and the wall growing between us. In late March, exactly 2 months before graduation day, I received an official-looking envelope in the mail. Inside was a letter on Harvard University letterhead, signed by Dean Lawson himself. "Dear Mr. Morgan, it is my great pleasure to invite you to be the keynote speaker at this year's Humanities Honors Ceremony, which takes place immediately following our general commencement exercises." My hands trembled as I read the date, the very day of Lizzie's graduation. The universe has a strange sense of humor sometimes, or perhaps it's not humor at all, but destiny, quietly arranging the pieces of our lives into patterns we can only recognize in retrospect. I never told Dean Lawson about Lizzie, and I certainly never told Lizzie about Dean Lawson. 2 worlds separated by a gulf of shame and pride, neither knowing they were about to collide. That night, I placed the invitation on my bedside table and whispered to Mary's photograph, "I don't know if this is right or wrong, love, but it feels like something I need to do." In the silence of my empty apartment, I could almost hear her answer, "Some lessons must be learned the hard way, Robert, even by those we love most." Graduation day arrived with the kind of perfect New England spring weather that seems custom-ordered for momentous occasions. The sky was an impossible blue, dotted with cotton-white clouds that drifted lazily over Harvard Yard. Magnolia trees, in full bloom, scented the air with their sweet perfume. It was Mary's favorite kind of day. I arrived 3 hours early, my heart hammering against my ribs like a prisoner demanding release. My speech, carefully crafted in 7 languages and memorized over countless sleepless nights, was folded in the breast pocket of my new suit. I'd splurged on it the week before using nearly 2 months' worth of savings. No more frayed cuffs or loose soles. Today, I wanted to look the part, even if I was playing two roles that no one knew were connected. A security guard eyed me suspiciously as I lingered near the entrance. "Ceremony doesn't start until 10, sir," he said, his tone making it clear I didn't look like I belonged. "I know," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just excited to see my daughter graduate." His expression softened slightly. "First in the family?" "Yes," I answered, the simple truth carrying the weight of generations. First in the family. I spent those early morning hours walking the perimeter of Harvard Yard, trying to calm my nerves. What would Lizzie say when she saw me? Would she acknowledge me at all? And later, when I took the stage, how would she react? The questions circled like vultures, picking at my resolve. At 9:30, I took my seat in the very last row of the parents' section, as far from the stage as possible. I'd deliberately chosen a spot where Lizzie was unlikely to spot me during the ceremony. Around me, families chatted excitedly, snapping photos and pointing out landmarks to grandparents and younger siblings. I sat alone, a solitary island in a sea of shared joy. The processional music began promptly at 10:15, and a hush fell over the crowd as the first graduates appeared. Row by row, they marched in, their black gowns billowing, their tassels swaying with each step. I craned my neck, searching for Lizzie among the hundreds of identical caps and gowns. And then I saw her, my beautiful girl, walking tall and proud, her honor cords draped around her shoulders like royalty. The sunlight caught her face at just the right angle, illuminating a smile so radiant it brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, despite everything, my heart swelled with a father's pride so fierce it nearly choked me. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of speeches and formalities. When they called Lizzie's name to receive her diploma, I stood and applauded until my palms stung, though I knew she couldn't see me in the crowd. "That's my girl," I whispered, the words carried away by the breeze. "That's my Lizzie." After the main ceremony concluded, the graduates dispersed to their respective department ceremonies. I followed at a distance as Lizzie and her fellow political science majors made their way across campus. The humanities honors ceremony, where I was scheduled to speak, would take place in the same building but in a different auditorium. I had about 40 minutes before I needed to meet Dean Lawson backstage. Just enough time to try to speak with Lizzie, to congratulate her properly before our worlds collided in a way I still couldn't fully imagine. I spotted her standing with a group of friends near the entrance to the political science department's reception. She looked happy, laughing at something a young man in wire-rimmed glasses had said. I hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Should I interrupt? Would I embarrass her again? Before I could decide, one of her friends noticed me hovering nearby and nudged Lizzie. She turned, and our eyes met across the sun-dappled courtyard. For a brief, beautiful moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the old Lizzie, my Lizzie, in her expression. But then her face hardened and she whispered something to her friends before reluctantly walking toward me. "Dad," she said, stopping several feet away. "I didn't know you were coming." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm so proud of you, Lizzie." She glanced back at her friends, who were watching our interaction with undisguised curiosity. "Thanks," she said flatly, "but I'm kind of in the middle of something. We're all heading to the reception together." "Of course," I nodded, trying to mask my disappointment. "I just wanted to say congratulations. Maybe we could grab dinner later, to celebrate." She shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. There are a lot of events tonight. I should probably stick with my class." One of her friends called out, "Liz, we're going in now." Liz, not Lizzie. Another small piece of her childhood, of our shared history, discarded like an outgrown sweater. "You should go," I said, forcing a smile. "I understand." She nodded, already turning away. But then, to my surprise, she paused. "Where are you sitting for the department ceremony? I can try to wave when they call my name." A small olive branch. I clutched at it desperately. "I'll be at the back," I said. "But don't worry about finding me, just enjoy your moment." She nodded again and rejoined her friends. I watched as they walked into the building together, laughing and talking animatedly. The young man with the glasses placed his hand on the small of Lizzie's back, a casual intimacy that made me realize how much of her life was now a mystery to me. I turned to head toward the humanities building where Dean Lawson would be waiting. As I did, I overheard a snippet of conversation from Lizzie's group carried to me on the breeze. "Who was that?" someone asked. "No one," came Lizzie's reply. "Just someone from back home." I froze mid-step, her words slicing through me like a blade between the ribs. Not my father, not even a family friend, just no one. In that moment, something inside me shattered completely. The fragile hope I'd been nurturing, that somehow today might begin to bridge the gulf between us, crumbled to dust. I didn't cry. Men of my generation were taught early that tears are a luxury we can't afford. Instead, I straightened my new tie, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the humanities building with as much dignity as I could muster. Each step felt like walking through deep water, my body suddenly impossibly heavy. Dean Lawson was waiting in the wings, reviewing his notes. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Ah, Robert, there you are. Quite a day, isn't it? Are you ready to make some history?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Wonderful," he continued, oblivious to my distress. "You'll be our grand finale. I've saved the best for last." He patted my shoulder. "By the way, your name is listed in the program as a special guest speaker. I hope you don't mind." I added a brief bio. Nothing extensive, just mentioning your work with our multilingual initiative. My name, in the program, that Lizzie might have already seen. The realization hit me like a physical blow, but it was too late now. The wheels were in motion, and I was powerless to stop them. As I took my seat on the stage, hidden behind a curtain until my introduction, I closed my eyes and spoke silently to Mary once more. "Our little girl is gone, love, and I don't know if what I'm about to do will bring her back or push her away forever." From behind the heavy velvet curtain, I watched as the auditorium filled. Distinguished professors in their academic regalia sat in the front rows, followed by proud parents and finally, the graduating students themselves. I scanned the crowd, my heart in my throat, searching for Lizzie's face among the sea of black caps. There, 5 rows from the back, sitting between the young man with wire-rimmed glasses and a girl with a bright red hairband. She was flipping through the program, her expression bored, clearly considering this ceremony just another box to check before the real celebrations began. Dean Lawson took the podium, his voice booming through the sound system. "Welcome to Harvard's Humanities Honors Ceremony. Today we celebrate not just academic achievement, but the power of language to bridge divides, to foster understanding, and to connect us across cultures and generations." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, about to demonstrate exactly that power, while the most important connection in my life, the one with my daughter, lay in tatters. The ceremony proceeded with a procession of awards and recognitions: outstanding thesis, excellence in research, community engagement. With each name called, applause rippled through the crowd, polite and measured. I noticed Lizzie checking her watch repeatedly, whispering occasionally to her friends. Then Dean Lawson's voice took on a different tone, warmer, more personal. "Before we conclude today's ceremony, I have the distinct honor of introducing a very special guest, someone who embodies the spirit of lifelong learning and the transformative power of language." I took a deep breath, adjusting my tie for the 100th time. My hands were slick with sweat, my mouth suddenly dessert dry. 2 years ago, I happened upon a poetry reading at the Boston Public Library. There I heard a man recite Victor Hugo in French so beautifully, with such perfect intonation and emotional resonance, that I was certain he must have been educated at the Sorbonne. A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. I saw Lizzie, still distracted, now scrolling through her phone beneath the cover of the program. "Imagine my surprise," Dean Lawson continued, "when I discovered that this man was a janitor who had only begun studying languages in his 60s at a community college night class." Now, Lizzie's head snapped up, her phone forgotten. I could see confusion clouding her features, even from a distance. This remarkable individual now speaks 7 languages with varying degrees of fluency, a testament to the fact that it is never too late to expand one's horizons, to reinvent oneself, to reach for new heights of understanding. Lizzie was now scanning the stage frantically, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Robert Morgan." The curtain parted. The spotlight found me. I rose on legs that felt like they might give way beneath me and walked to the podium. The applause was enthusiastic but curious. Who was this unknown man? And why had the esteemed Dean Lawson chosen him for this honor? As I took my place behind the microphone, I deliberately caught Lizzie's eye. The shock on her face was absolute, as if she were seeing a ghost. Her friends were turning to her, clearly asking questions. The young man with the glasses was checking the program, then looking back at me with narrowed eyes. I adjusted the microphone, cleared my throat, and then, deliberately, I began to speak in my heaviest Kentucky accent. Thank y'all for having me here today. It's a mighty honor to be standing in such a prestigious place as Harvard. I saw Lizzie's face flush crimson. Her hand flew to her mouth. Around her, people were shooting confused glances between us, the family resemblance now obvious to anyone looking for it. I paused, letting the discomfort build. Then I smiled, looked directly at Lizzie, and shifted seamlessly into flawless Spanish. El lenguaje es un puente entre mundos, entre corazones, entre generaciones. Nos permite ver más allá de nuestras propias experiencias, caminar en los zapatos de otro. The surprise was palpable, both from the audience and from Lizzie, whose expression had transformed from embarrassment to utter bewilderment. Without pausing, I transitioned to French, my voice gaining confidence with each word. Le pouvoir des mots transcende les frontières que nous construisons, les frontières de classe, d'éducation, de privilèges. Les mots peuvent nous élever ou nous détruire. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. I could see Professor nodding, impressed, students sitting up straighter, parents exchanging looks of admiration. Italian flowed next from my lips, the melodic syllables dancing in the air. La vita ci insegna che non è mai troppo tardi per reinventarsi, per scoprire nuovi talenti, per diventare qualcosa di più di ciò che pensavamo di essere. I glanced at Lizzie again. She sat frozen, her expression unreadable now. The young man beside her was whispering urgently in her ear, but she seemed not to hear him. Mandarin followed, my tones carefully modulated after months of practice with a patient Chinese grandmother from our language group. Then Arabic, its rich consonants and flowing script having become a secret passion of mine. Finally German, the language that had been most difficult for me, with its precise grammar and compound words. Manchmal müssen wir uns verlieren, uns zu finden. Manchmal müssen wir falsch verstanden werden, endlich gehört zu werden. Then, at last, I returned to English, but not the exaggerated accent I'd begun with. Instead, I spoke in the clear, precise English I'd worked so hard to master, with just the faintest hint of my Kentucky roots remaining, like the ghost of a memory. Sometimes the greatest distance we travel is not measured in miles or kilometers, but in the journey from shame to pride, from rejection to acceptance, from invisibility to being truly seen. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. I could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. I stand before you today not as a professor or scholar, but as a living testament to a simple truth. Education has no expiration date. Dignity has no prerequisites. And the human spirit, when fueled by determination rather than defeated by shame, can accomplish what many might consider impossible. I spoke for another 10 minutes weaving between languages, sharing stories from our little language group, Hassan's journey from Syrian refugee to medical translator, Gloria's joy at reading Goodnight Moon to her grandchildren in their native tongue. I spoke about the power of words to both wound and heal, to divide and unite. Throughout it all, I never directly acknowledged Lizzie, never mentioned that my own daughter sat in the audience, never revealed the pain that had driven me to this moment. Those were private wounds, not for public display. As I concluded my speech, I returned one final time to each language, offering a brief proverb or quote about wisdom, perseverance, and forgiveness. The last in English was from Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. The applause was thunderous, unexpected. A standing ovation erupted, sweeping through the auditorium like a wave. Dean Lawson was beaming as he returned to the podium, clasping my shoulder with genuine warmth. Only one person remained seated, still as a statue amidst the rising tide of appreciation. Lizzie stared at me, tears streaming silently down her face, her expression a complex tapestry of emotions I couldn't begin to unravel. Shame, pride, confusion, regret, all washing over her features in rapid succession. I held her gaze for a long moment, neither of us blinking. Then I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledgement not accusation, before turning to shake Dean Lawson's hand. As I left the stage, the weight of the moment pressed against my chest like a physical thing. What had I just done? Vindicated myself? Humiliated my daughter? Created a bridge or burned one beyond repair? I honestly didn't know. The reception following the ceremony was a blur of handshakes and congratulations. Faculty members approached me with business cards and invitations to guest lecture. Students asked for photographs. A reporter from the university newspaper hovered nearby, scribbling notes furiously. Through it all, I smiled and nodded, answered questions politely, but my eyes kept drifting to the doorway searching for Lizzie. She never appeared. As the crowd finally began to thin, Dean Lawson pulled me aside. "Robert, that was extraordinary. Simply extraordinary." The board of trustees was deeply impressed. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Between us, I believe there might be an honorary degree in your future." The irony wasn't lost on me. I, who had never finished high school, now being considered for an honorary Harvard degree. Life has a peculiar sense of humor. "That's very kind," I replied, "but not necessary." "Nonsense. Your story is precisely what we need to share, a testament to the democratization of knowledge." He glanced at his watch. "I'd love to continue this conversation, but I have a dinner with donors. Perhaps we could meet next week to discuss future opportunities." I nodded, not really hearing him. My thoughts were elsewhere, with a young woman who was probably at this very moment trying to reconcile the father she'd been ashamed of with the man who had just commanded a standing ovation at Harvard. After Dean Lawson departed, I slipped away from the remaining well-wishers and made my way back to the main auditorium. It was empty now, the graduates and their families having moved on to private celebrations. Rows of empty chairs faced the abandoned stage, programs scattered like fallen leaves. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the vast space. When I reached the row where Lizzie had sat, I paused. Her program lay abandoned on her chair, open to the page with my biography. Someone, Lizzie I presumed, had circled my name in pen, the ink bleeding through the thin paper like a wound. Beside it, scrawled in a handwriting I would recognize anywhere, were two words: my father. My knees nearly buckled. I sank into the chair next to hers, clutching the program to my chest, as if it were some precious artifact. For several minutes, I sat there in the silent auditorium, allowing waves of emotion to wash over me. Pride, sorrow, regret, vindication, and something else I couldn't quite name. Relief, perhaps, or forgiveness. Eventually, I roused myself. I had one more task to complete before I could go home. From my breast pocket, I withdrew an envelope. Inside was a letter I'd written the night before, after hours of drafting and redrafting. The words had to be perfect, not to wound, not to accuse, but to explain, to bridge, to heal, if healing was still possible. With trembling fingers, I placed the envelope on Lizzie's empty chair. On the front, I'd written simply, Elizabeth Morgan. Not Lizzie. Not Liz. The formal name seemed appropriate for this most formal of reckonings. I didn't know if she would ever find it. Perhaps the custodial staff would discard it during cleanup. Perhaps it would be swept away with the programs and forgotten. But I had to try. I had to leave her something more lasting than a public display, however well received. The letter inside was 4 pages long, written in my unsteady hand. I'd begun it a dozen times before finding the right opening. My dearest daughter, by now you know that your old dad isn't quite what you thought. Or perhaps I am exactly what you feared. A reminder of roots you've worked so hard to transcend. Either way, there are things you should know. Things I've never told you. The pages that followed contained the story of the last 2 years. The chance discovery of the language class flyer, Miriam's kindness, the library project, my meetings with Dean Lawson. I explained how each step had been motivated not by revenge or bitterness, but by a desperate need to rebuild my own sense of worth after hearing my daughter deny me. I wrote about the nights I'd spent studying while mopping floors at Boston University, dictionary propped open on my cleaning cart. About the flashcards I reviewed during lunch breaks sitting alone in the janitor's closet. About the recordings I made on a secondhand tape recorder, playing them back during my bus commute to correct my pronunciation. I told her about the billets, the small notes she used to leave me as a child. How I'd kept every single one, from the crayon scribbles signed Love, Lizzie, to the carefully composed Mother's Day cards addressed to me after Mary died. How I'd pasted them into a scrapbook that I still kept by my bedside. A testament to a time when my broken English hadn't embarrassed her, but had simply been the sound of her father's love. On the 3rd page, I wrote about Mary, How she would have been bursting with pride today, not just at Lizzie's accomplishments, but at the beautiful, brilliant woman she'd become. How Mary had made me promise in those final days when cancer had reduced her to skin and bone, that I would ensure Lizzie received the education neither of us had been fortunate enough to obtain. I have kept that promise, I wrote, perhaps too well. I gave you wings strong enough to fly far beyond the small world where you began. I cannot blame you for using them. The final page was the hardest to write, and the most important. It contained no accusations, no guilt trips, no demands for apology. Instead, it offered context and a choice. You once told your friends I couldn't even speak proper English. You were right. The English I spoke, was shaped by coal country and limited schooling, by graveyard shifts and sacrificed opportunities. It was the English of a man who chose providing over perfecting, who chose your future over his own. Maybe I'll never speak English exactly as you want, but I've learned to speak in 7 languages now. The only one I still haven't mastered is how to speak to your shame. I don't write this to hurt you, Elizabeth, or to embarrass you, only to say that I see you, all of you, including the parts you wish to leave behind. And I love every syllable of your being, every accent of your heart, every grammar of your soul. Whatever happens next is your choice. I will be at Colby's Diner on Sunday morning at 9 hours, as I am every week. There will be a place for you if you want it. If not, I understand. Some journeys must be walked alone before they can be shared again. With all my love, in every language I know, your father. I sealed the letter with a trembling hand, pressing my lips briefly to the envelope before placing it on the empty chair. It seemed simultaneously too much and not enough, this paper vessel carrying the accumulated weight of so much unspoken truth. As I walked out of the auditorium, I didn't look back. Whatever would come next was beyond my control now. I had said what needed saying in all the languages at my disposal. The rest was silence and waiting. Outside, twilight was settling over Harvard Yard. The celebration sounds had faded, leaving behind the hushed reverence of ancient trees and older traditions. A light rain had begun to fall, gentle as whispered apologies. I turned my face up to it, letting the cool drops mingle with the tears I finally allowed myself to shed. Not tears of bitterness or triumph, but of release, of letting go. Whatever Lizzie decided, to reach out or to retreat further, I had reclaimed something essential today. Not just my dignity, but my voice. All of my voices in every language I'd painstakingly learned, including finally the language of my own worth. The Sunday after graduation dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect June morning that seems to promise endless possibilities. I arrived at Colby's Diner at 8:30, a full half hour before I'd told Lizzie I would be there. The familiar bell jingled as I pushed open the door, and Marge, the weekend waitress who'd been serving me breakfast for over a decade, waved from behind the counter. "The usual, Robert," she called, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Please." I nodded, sliding into my regular booth by the window. The vinyl seat was cracked in exactly the same places it had been cracked last week, and the week before that, and all the weeks stretching back to when Lizzie was small enough to need a booster seat to reach the table. Marge brought over my coffee and placed a second mug upside down across from me, the way she always did when she noticed me checking my watch or glancing at the door. "Expecting company today?" she asked, a hopeful lilt in her voice. She'd watched Lizzie grow up in this diner, had slipped her extra bacon when she thought I wasn't looking, had congratulated her on every academic achievement from spelling bee victories to Harvard acceptance. "Maybe," I replied, not wanting to explain the complexity of the situation. "We'll see." Marge patted my shoulder sympathetically. She didn't know the details, but she was perceptive enough to have noticed Lizzie's increasing absences over the years, the way our Sunday breakfasts had dwindled from weekly traditions to occasional obligations to, finally, memories. At precisely 9 by, my eyes fixed on the door. The bell remained silent. By 9:30, I'd finished my first cup of coffee and started on a second. By 10 soir, Marge had brought my breakfast without being asked. 2 eggs over easy, whole wheat toast, hash browns, side of bacon. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing. At 10:45, I paid my bill, leaving my customary generous tip. "Same time next week?" Marge asked, as she always did. "Same time next week," I confirmed, as I always did. The walk home felt longer than usual. Each step weighted with the confirmation of what I'd already suspected. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. Some words once spoken cannot be unheard. Some distances once established cannot be crossed, at least not quickly and perhaps not ever. I didn't blame Lizzie. How could I? I had orchestrated a very public revelation of her shame. However unintentional the humiliation might have been. My speech, my languages, my unexpected moment in the spotlight, all of it had exposed the carefully constructed narrative she'd built about herself, about her origins. I had forced her to see herself through my eyes, and perhaps that vision was too uncomfortable to face across a diner table on a Sunday morning. Days passed, then weeks. June faded into July. I continued my language classes, now as an assistant teacher rather than a student. Dean Lawson called several times with various offers and opportunities, which I accepted or declined based on what felt right in the moment. Life went on, as it tends to do even when we think it might stop out of respect for our pain. Then, on a sweltering afternoon in late July, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, just my name written in a hand I would recognize anywhere. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for nearly an hour before finding the courage to open it. Inside was my old dictionary, the battered, dog-eared Webster's that had been my constant companion during Lizzie's childhood. I'd used it to decipher school notices, to help with her homework, to understand the increasingly complex world she inhabited. Somewhere along the way, it had disappeared from my bookshelf. I'd assumed it had been discarded during one of my infrequent cleaning frenzies. But here it was, returned to me. Not just returned, but restored. The torn cover had been carefully mended, the frayed edges reinforced, the broken spine repaired with what looked like professional bookbinding techniques. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a yellow post-it marking a page. The word at the top was reconciliation, and beside it, in Lizzie's neat handwriting, were 6 simple words that cracked my heart wide open. Dad, teach me how to say sorry in all languages, you know. I sat heavily in my kitchen chair, the dictionary cradled in my hands like something infinitely precious and fragile. For several minutes I couldn't move, couldn't think, could barely breathe. The simplicity of the request, the humility of it, the sheer vulnerability, it was so unlike the Harvard Lizzie, and so very much like the little girl who used to climb into my lap with picture books. I didn't call her, didn't text, didn't email. The request seemed to demand something more tangible, more thoughtful than the immediate gratification of modern communication. Instead, I went to the garden. Not my own small patch of struggling tomato plants, but the community garden where Mary and I had taken Lizzie as a child, where she had learned the names of flowers and vegetables in both English and the broken Spanish I'd picked up working construction jobs, where she had once buried a tooth, convinced it would grow into a money tree. It was there, sitting on the same weathered bench where I'd once read Charlotte's Web aloud to her, that I began to speak. In a voice just above a whisper, I taught an absent daughter how to apologize in 7 languages. Lo siento, I murmured in Spanish, explaining how it literally meant, I feel it, acknowledging the pain one has caused. Je suis désolé, in French, with its roots in the word for desolation, a recognition of the emptiness created by hurt. Mi dispiace, in Italian, it displeases me, a sharing of the dismay at what has happened. Es tut mir leid in German, it causes me suffering, making the apologizer's own pain explicit. Asif, in Arabic, derived from a word meaning regret and sorrow. Dui buki, in Mandarin, literally cannot rise to face, a physical manifestation of shame and contrition. And finally, in English, the simplest and yet perhaps the most difficult, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please forgive me. An elderly woman tending her garden plot nearby gave me a curious look, but said nothing. Perhaps she understood that some lessons must be taught even in absence, some words spoken aloud even if the intended recipient isn't there to hear them. Because forgiveness, I was learning, doesn't always need witnesses. Sometimes it's a private act of grace extended not for the benefit of an audience, but because the human heart can only carry so much weight before it breaks beneath the burden. I don't know if Lizzie ever found out about my garden soliloquy. I never told her, just as I never told her that I carried her note in my wallet afterward, tucked behind Mary's photograph and the tattered language class flyer, 3 paper talismans marking the most significant chapters of my life. What I do know is this. 3 Sundays later, as I sat in my usual booth at Colby's Diner, the bell above the door jingled at precisely 9:07. And there she was, my daughter, my Lizzie, looking both older and younger than she had at graduation, her Harvard Polish temporarily set aside in favor of the jeans and simple sweater she'd always worn for our Sunday breakfasts. Our eyes met across the diner. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us needed to. Some languages transcend words entirely. Marge, bless her heart, didn't miss a beat. She simply flipped over the waiting mug, filled it with coffee, and said, "Good to see you again, honey. It's been too long." Lizzie slid into the booth across from me, her hands curling around the warm mug. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. And in those two simple syllables, I heard all the languages of forgiveness I had ever needed to learn. Sometimes the greatest journeys we take aren't measured in miles, but in the courage it takes to reclaim our dignity. Robert didn't learn 7 languages to shame his daughter. He did it to find himself again after being erased by the person he loved most. Would you have had the strength to sit in that garden and teach forgiveness to the empty air? Would you have left that chair open at the diner every Sunday, hoping that broken bridges might someday be rebuilt? The words we speak to those we love can either build monuments or dig graves. In a single moment, Lizzie's rejection cut deeper than any physical wound, yet it was those very cuts that pushed her father to discover depths of resilience he never knew he possessed. Perhaps there's a lesson here for all of us. Our greatest transformations often begin at our most painful moments, and sometimes, the person we need to forgive first is ourselves. If this story touched your heart, please follow our channel for more powerful tales of redemption, forgiveness, and the complicated beauty of family relationships. Like and share with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to learn a new language, especially the language of reconciliation. Your support helps us continue bringing these emotional true stories to light.